Happy Tuesday, everybody, and welcome in to GC Live Talking Tuesday Nights. I'm Mike Yuva, and alongside me is Intern Joe. Intern Joe, look, we are under 100 days away. No, we didn't do a show last week.
Baseball heating up.
We are going to do a lot of baseball stuff over the next couple days. I know this is a football show, but I want to throw that out there. We have a lot of great things lined up over at GC that we will be sharing over the next couple days, and hopefully we'll be doing plenty of shows as the baseball team prepares to host a regional back in Columbia. But staying with football, I want to begin tonight's show talking about recruiting, because at this time of the year, we know heading into next month, a couple days away until June, things are really going to start to pick up. The last 2 years, again, we only have a small sample size. How many times we've said that with Shane Beamer? But the last 2 years, South Carolina has picked up 7 commitments in the month of June. Okay? 7 commitments. 7 last year, 7 the year before in the month of June. USC is ahead of where they were a year ago as far as numbers are concerned, which we will get into. They are ahead of how many commitments they had 2 years ago. Do I expect them to land 7 again this time around? Maybe not, but I say that just because if it doesn't seem like, wow, why isn't South Carolina having as many commitments this year in the month of June compared to in years past? It's because they have already, 10 commitments already, Intern Joe. And again, that's not to say that they won't pick up 7 or 8 or whatever the case may be. I think over the course of June, July, and August, they will land plenty. But this time around, it might be a little bit different. But the quality is what I would look at more than anything. The quality over the quantity.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. On3 recruits just tweeted recently the 2024 blue chip percentage, which the committed 4-star plus 5-star percentage in South Carolina is second in the country behind Alabama with 89% blue chip percentage. That's good. And they're, like you said, Mike, they're all committed already. It's really, really, really front heavy class. These guys wanted to get committed. I think that's something we're going to start seeing under the Beamer regime a little bit more, as guys committing earlier because they want to, like Dante, for example, wanted to commit early and build the class around, his weapons. And, I think that was big. I think we're going to start to see, like I said, a little bit more of that in the Beamer era. But June is a huge month for recruiting. Got a lot of guys visiting. You got camps, finalists. Dante's going to the Elite 11 finals, which we'll get to. We'll break that down a little bit. But yeah, absolutely, Mike. Big month for recruiting coming up here.
Quick correction I want to make is that South Carolina has 9 commitments right now. All right, because they lost one just the other day. Oh, I say the other day, last week that is. But again, with Mike Williams, the offensive lineman, decommitting from South Carolina last week. So I say that so to give you an idea, South Carolina has 9 commitments as of today. Okay, you got one more day left in May. I don't expect another welcome home to go public tomorrow. But again, that's where we stand as of today, 9. Last year, South Carolina had just one. And we saw how that 2023 class ended up, Intern Joe. It ended up pretty freaking good. Finished the 16th best in the country, 12 spots up on the On3 recruiting list. When you're talking about the national rankings, up 12 spots from where they were the previous year. I also want to share that for the class of 2022, at the end of May, South Carolina had 4 commitments. So again, while South Carolina, last 2 years, last 2 Junes, they've picked up 7 commitments in each of those years when we're talking about June. It's a little different this year. It's a little different. And as you mentioned, the blue chip ratio, where USC stands right now in comparison to where they were a year ago at this time, the quality is going to continue to get better. At least that's the hope. That's what you would expect with what USC has been able to do. since Beamer has arrived here, right? I mean, each year you're seeing the talent as far as who USC is attracting, right? I mean, look back to when Shane Beamer first arrived here, or at least had his first full recruiting class. They weren't going after guys like Nicholas Harbor, or I say going after being able to land a guy like Nicholas Harbor. The guys that they've been going after are some of the best when it comes to their positions. You look at a guy like Josiah Thompson, right? I mean, number 2 on 3 for his position. 21st nationally is what he is ranked. Cam Pringle, on 3 consensus, number 4 for his position, also on the offensive line. Michael Smith, tight end, number 7th by on 3 when you're talking about his position. So again, we're starting to see a trend in the quality of players. And that's not to say that USC has attracted crappy players over the last couple of years. I mean, no one is saying that. Let's not get that misconstrued, because you look at the class last year, but certainly so far, and there's a reason why they are the number 6 team in the country when it comes to recruiting for the class of 2024. The quality has continued to get better. So again, focus more on the quality part of it, which I think a lot of us would agree with that regardless. But if the welcome homes, which I'm not saying there's not going to be a couple of them in the month of June, but if there's not as many, again, remind yourself where you are. Remind yourself that you only had one freaking commitment at this time last year. And things just continue to get better. I expect, though, a couple. I know South Carolina, like many schools right now, intern Joe, they're really pushing and encouraging players to commit early. I mean, that's something that more schools want to do, because when you take into consideration the transfer portal, and we are coming towards the end, which seems like it was forever ago. Maybe it seems like it was just yesterday to some, but the COVID season, some of these players are coming towards the end of having that extra year of eligibility. So you throw all those factors in there. Coaches are really, really preaching on being able to get players to commit earlier so they can figure out the numbers game. But on top of it, like you mentioned with Reno, it also helps with recruiting, because players can really go out there and say, hey, I want you to be part of what we're doing. Look at all the guys that we have here. Reno, of course, being one of the catalysts for USC for this year's class. You look at last year with Pup Howard and what he was able to do. A very, very crucial part of recruiting today.
Yeah, Mike, absolutely. I wanted to bring up Kevin's comment too, because you mentioned, South Carolina wasn't necessarily going after guys like Nicholas Harbor when Beamer first got here. Dylan Stewart's another guy. I mean, we talk about him so much. Do we think Dylan Stewart will commit before the season? When I talked to him last summer, yeah, his plan was to commit before summer was over. And I would assume it's, on the same timeline. He's taking visits like it is, like he expects to commit before his senior season, just because, he stressed to me last summer. He's like, I just want to make sure everything is lined up, ready to go in case, injury or something like that, knocking on wood. But, the Dylan Stewart sweepstakes is alive and well, Mike. And it's going to be a big, big June for South Carolina and other schools in that sweepstakes.
And I want to pull up the quote, since we're talking about Dylan Stewart.
Mm-hmm.
He had a recent conversation with On3.
And Chad Simmons, I believe.
Looking for that exact quote. So, intern Joe, if you find it before me, we'll pull it up.
Yeah,
but, the whole point being is where South Carolina stands. And I'll pull up on our website so everyone can see the RPM as far as where South Carolina stands for the Dylan Stewart sweepstakes. USC is in a great position. Great position. The thing that obviously scares you when it comes to just where recruiting is nowadays, and this isn't necessarily talking just about Dylan Stewart, this is just talking about recruiting in general. NIL is something that is it's the X factor, right? Because not every player is making a decision based on NIL, right? I mean, it's there. You'd be naive to believe that players and families aren't exercising the proper measures that they want to go down. I don't know what the heck's going on above me. I don't know if you can hear any. It looks like the friggin' running of the bulls here in this condo. I mean, that dog's like a freaking horse. Holy cow. But, they're going to go down their list. They're going to check off their boxes and try to, educate themselves the best they can. And at the same time, too, they want to be able to put themselves in a situation where they can potentially, get some money out of it, right? Be able to put little Johnny or whoever in a situation where they can capitalize off their name, image, and likeness. So, as we know, USC with the Garnet Trust, that has been very, very big. You have other schools, though, that are doing what they can. So, again, I say that because not saying that will be the deciding factor for Dylan Stewart. Seems like he has a really good connection with Shane Beamer, and that was one of the things he mentioned in that quote, intern Joe, that we'll pull up shortly. But I think that relationship and how USC has gone about it the last couple of years since Beamer has arrived, those relationships have made a difference. Again, it's not going to win over every player, but you look at Nicholas Harbor, and it's hard not to say that it's not working. Harbor goes somewhere else. That's not to say that it hasn't been working, but you have a player of that caliber, and we don't know the exact number. But Nike, Oregon, Phil Knight, they were throwing a bag and a half at Nicholas Harbor to commit to Oregon. That didn't happen. Is he going to have the same NIL opportunities here? Maybe they don't measure up exactly to what Oregon could have provided, but at the same time, too, it's not all about money. And that's what Beamer was preaching to Harbor. And at the end of the day, he chose South Carolina. And using a player like that, it's hard to argue that other players aren't going to pay attention to that, especially if USC has success this year and Harbor is able to find a way to carve out a role that can be one that can be quick, right? Finding a way to get on the field quickly, or obviously making an impact in track and field as well, which we all expect.
Yeah, Mike, I mean, I feel like a broken record because we talk about this every single time when we talk about recruiting and NIL, but it's the NFL factor of South Carolina's coaching staff.
Yep.
Bringing in all the NFL experience, it's essentially your NIL, what you're missing, and NIL funds you're getting back in terms of NFL experience. It's like, hey, we can't necessarily do as much as this other school, but we can get you to the next level. And that's our goal. That's always been our goal, is to get you to the next level. And it's, number one, keeps you by your word, but two, it excites guys playing under the lights. I mean, it is the NFL. It's one of the most profitable league in all of sports. So, I mean, Mike, we talk about it every week, but it's one of the bigger advantages in Dylan Stewart's case. Sterling Lucas, his time with the Baltimore Ravens, and all of that. So I think it's huge when again, you're comparing your NIL funds or NIL collectives and stuff to these other bigger schools. Don't forget about that NFL side of things.
And as I go through and trying to get the Dylan Stewart slide up for us, again, still early in the recruiting process. And as you can see, based on what the RPM is, and to remind people, if you remember following along the day of Nicholas Harbor's commitment, and even, I'd say 48 hours, right? 48 hours, everything was really going up and down with his RPM. This is the roller coaster that is recruiting. And that's what the RPM is supposed to show you. It's taken into consideration what not just the insiders for South Carolina when it comes to recruiting, Wes, Chris, but the national recruiting as well. And the guys that cover some of these other schools that some of these players are going for a player. What high school coaches are saying. Everything's kind of, it's this big algorithm. And what you're going to see when you see Dylan Stewart's, that number right now for South Carolina, it's a little bit low in comparison to some of these other schools. But at the same time, too, that doesn't mean That doesn't mean that USC is not in the running. And this is what Stewart had to say, and that was to the interview that you mentioned by Chad Simmons, who does a phenomenal job with On Three for us from a national standpoint.
The GOAT.
He said to Chad, this is from Dylan Stewart, quote, "I like what Coach Beamer is doing. I see what he's trying to build, and I might want to be part of that," he said. He's building a good program. He also went on to say they have to have all the components I'm looking for, all the non-negotiables. Stewart said of what he needs to find at the next level, player development on and off the field. I have to like the guys I'm going to be around in a good recruiting class. So you look at that, you know where he stands right now, right? You know where he stands right now as far as his thoughts on South Carolina. And I think from everything I've been told about the young man, and I know you had a chance to talk with him, Joe,
last summer,
he's not BSing anyone when he says all that, right? We hear cliche things that players say sometimes, right? Like, oh, I'm looking for this and that. No, it's the God's honest truth. And I don't want to compare him to Nicholas Harbor in the sense of what Harbor was looking for, but it makes me think about Harbor. And what I mean by that is it's not necessarily chasing that dollar sign. Like that stuff, it's going to come. Wherever he goes, that's going to come. I mean, you look at it right now from an NIL standpoint, the projection right now, 320,000. And that number should continue to go up as we head into this next season, regardless of where he commits.
Yeah, Mike, I mean, what you see is what you get with Dylan Stewart. He's one of the more humble kids that, I haven't been around the whole recruiting cycle for very long, but meeting Dylan Stewart was a nice breath of fresh air, really humble kid. And I think one big thing with Dylan Stewart is that, he's involved with the group chats of all of the recruits that are committed, with Dante, with Tree and all those guys. So I think it's big. And that, the fact that he said, he wants to be a part of a class and wants to like the guys that he's going in with. You look at South Carolina's 2024 class already. I mean, those guys are so tight. It's unbelievable. I mean, you talk to Dante, ask him how tight they are. I mean, he'll talk to you for, minutes and minutes and minutes about how close these guys have gotten. And so I think that's huge and definitely a big draw for a guy like D. Stewart, again, who, like I said, is a little bit more humble, likes to stay within himself. So big, that the fact that he said he wants to be with, a family atmosphere, because that's all Beamer has been preaching.
There's a lot of neat things too. If you're new to the On 3 game, or maybe you're not a subscriber and you want to check things out, head on over to On 3, type in Dylan Stewart when it comes to football recruiting, and you can see his measurements, comparisons to not just where he measures up against some of the best players in the rest of the class of 2024. You see the comparison from an NFL standpoint. You can see where, his measurements compared to some of the NFL guys over the last 3 years for his position, just from some really cool stuff. Highlights as well. I will say this, though. Going back to the RPM, which you can see everything, right? Ohio State, Alabama, Miami, South Carolina. Those numbers, obviously, if he were to, verbally commit at any point of time, those will change. But heading into the month of June, even if he does not make his commitment in the month of June, I expect these numbers to change. I expect this number right here for South Carolina to go up a lot. So, again, the reason I say that is because I just truly feel, based on the conversations that I've had with people close to the program, that USC is sitting in a much better spot than I think a lot of people believe they're in. And, again, hearing those comments from Stewart, it makes me feel that when he comes on campus this summer, he's going to be in a situation where he's surrounded by guys, whether it be Reno, whether it be some of these other players, and he's going to be able to get that feeling of, hey, these are the guys I'd be coming into this class with. And like you said, intern Joe, like we've seen with some of these other players from the class of 2024, even going back to 2023, they're very, very close. They're very close. And they want to be able to outdo the previous class. That was something that Reno mentioned. So being able to land a guy like Dylan Stewart, and again, heading into the month of June, it's going to be a big recruiting month for South Carolina. It always is. It's been a big one for Beamer since he arrived here a couple of years back. I expect it to be big too. And I think that it could be the difference. It could be the difference between landing Stewart over one of these other schools being able to pick him up.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, in the weekend he is coming visit on, I'm not exactly sure what it is, but I know like half of the class, if not all of it, is going to be there that weekend. So very, very big visit upcoming for Dylan Stewart in South Carolina. So I'm
So I
interested
want to
to see how Sterling Lucas handles it.
I do want to bring this up by Carolina rundown, and I says he blames me for the Celtics losing. Look, I tell you what, I don't know if I'd have as many turnovers as Jaylen Brown. It was a tough one for JB last night. Tough one for the C's all in general. But I will say this though about how RPM works, because again, On3 still a fairly new company. RPM is different with how they go about their algorithms in comparison to the Crystal Balls and some of the other recruiting websites that are out there. But to give you just the synopsis, and I'm going to pop this up, as you can see, it combines the data and expert predictions on an AI platform. And as we all know, AI is becoming the new thing, right? It's been around for a while, but it's becoming bigger and bigger, and it's also making an impact with helping when it comes to recruiting. The algorithm is built to learn from past results. Therefore, accuracy will continue to improve over time since On3 hasn't been around as long. So it kind of picks up the patterns when it comes to a coach's success when it comes to recruiting. Because, again, it's not just Wes, it's not just Chris, it's not just Chad Simmons, the national recruiter for us at On3. It's not what just they're hearing, right? It's also what some of the reporters and recruiting experts for some of the other schools, or Georgia and Alabama, some of these schools that are also in the sweepstake for, in this case, Dylan Stewart, but it could be it for any player. And it takes all that information and, you put it into a big blender and it kind of pours out what they're hearing. That's why, again, going back to, and I put a video up on National Signing Day to explain what took place with Nicholas Harbor, why that number was going up and down, because it truly was a circus. I mean, Beamer explained it on National Signing Day, how the day of, I think it was 3 a.m., 2 a.m., he sent him a message saying, hey, coach, I think I'm going to commit to Oregon. So that's why it was going up and down and up and down. And I know some people are like, oh, is this just BS? Is this just throwing out whatever numbers? No, it's the God's honest truth of what's being said in real time. And I have, as someone that was on the outside looking in, and I'm sure intern Joe, I'm sure you'd say the same thing. When you're on the outside looking in, whether it be the crystal balls, whether it be, in this case, RPM, you're interested yourself in knowing, like, how does this actually work? Right. I mean, where are they just getting some of these numbers? And then you're on the other side of it. You start to learn more. I have no input when it comes to the RPM stuff, but you start to learn more about it. You understand how it's operating. And I think as a subscriber on the outside, right, if you're on the other side of it, the more you become familiar with On3, the older On3 gets, the more familiar you get with RPM, you'll understand the algorithms a little bit better. And again, that AI platform, it's going to continue to pick up habits and how coaches have success, certain areas, right? I mean, DMV has been a big area where South Carolina has been going after since Beamer has arrived. So what's the success up there? I mean, it takes all these things into consideration, but because it's only been around for a short period of time, because On3 isn't that old, it still is very young, and those numbers will become more accurate over a period of time. But that's where we are right now. So hopefully that answered your question a little bit, because I'm sure you're not the only person that was curious about that.
Yeah, absolutely. We had another question from Curtis I did want to hit before we forgot to get to it, but not to get off target. How many true freshmen do you see possibly starting or even playing this year?
I think, and we talked about this before, intern Joe.
Yeah.
I think over the next couple of years, you'll see the number of true freshmen from a too deep standpoint drop, which isn't a bad thing. That means you're bringing in talent, right? I mean, some of it obviously can be from the transfer portal, but you're bringing in talent, you're developing that talent, and now you're putting them in a situation where you have experience, where you don't have to play a freshman. There will always be outliers, right? You look back to last year with Nick Eamon-Worry. You look back to last year with DQ Smith. I mean, those are the two players that pop up in my head instantly. I think that number, I mean, you look at edge, I could see Desmond, Umeozulu, potentially seeing more time as the season goes on. I mean, you pray that a guy like Jordan Strawn and Terrell Dawkins, those guys can get better in coming back from their injuries. But I think Desmond has a chance. I really do. I think, I'm not saying right away, but as the season goes on, running back, you hope that Joyner or Juju or Mario Anderson can be that guy in your running back room. But I wouldn't rule out Dontavius Braswell from the possibility of starting a game at some point. Not the beginning of the season, but based on where South Carolina's running back room is. I mean, we saw injuries last year. I don't think it's crazy to look at Braswell and say, hey, there's a possibility at some point he could start. Do I expect him to start this season? No, but I wouldn't rule that out. And then, look, we talked about him before. Nicholas Harbor competing at wide receiver. It's been the world's worst kept secret. He's going to come in. He's going to have an opportunity to play some wide receiver and be a starter.
Yeah.
How these packages are broken up, right? I mean, they have so many tight ends. They got talented receivers. We know that. Nicholas Harbor brings you that speed. He can be that deep threat. Eddie Lewis can be that deep threat. Of course, he's not a freshman. Defensively, though, one more I want to throw in there. I think Pup Howard. I think Pup Howard's another guy that you could see. So, I know I'm kind of hopping around right now, but those are the ones that come to mind to me, Joe.
Yeah, Nick Harbor, Pup Howard. Obviously the guys. I liked your Des U pick too. I think there's a chance he gets on the field as well. So obviously just the bigger names, obviously. I think you might see a little bit on the offensive line.
I'm glad you brought that up because there's two that could see.
Big
Marquis Anderson and Luatosa Babalade, a.k.a. Tree.
Tree, yeah. Could get some reps. I could see them kind of jumping in like, a rotational spot. Somebody goes down, put them in the fire.
Might be the case early. The case early with where the depth is. And I know,
that's what
I want to hit on that too, because I did a story last week with the offensive line and where South Carolina stands. And again, we didn't have a show last week, so we didn't hit on it. But intern Joe, I think that's a good point that you brought up. Marquis Anderson, Tree, two guys that, again, you hope when it comes to an offensive lineman, you're hoping that you don't have to throw them out there into the fire right away. But, I mean, these are two highly, highly touted recruited offensive linemen, highly touted. And based on what could possibly be the case because of Jalen Nichols being down, if there is some shuffling that needs to take place, those two guys could be right in the mix. I think those are two excellent picks, intern Joe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Because, I mean, just the depth, the offensive line, I think you need to see some freshmen step up. And I also agree with Lynn. And Mike, you said it earlier too, with the way the transfer portal is, I don't think you're going to see many more freshmen on the two deep, and just the way free agency style transfer portal is kind of taken over. You're going to see a little bit less action from freshmen. But
so let's stay with that offensive lineman topic though. Okay. Because I like that. To give people an idea of where South Carolina is right now. And I know we've talked about the numbers before, the number of starting snaps in comparison to last year, and you're losing that core of starters. You do have people that are coming back that have started, but you're losing that core group. South Carolina currently, because again, they can always add a player or two from the transfer portal. They can add a player as a preferred walk-on. We've seen that the last couple weeks with a pair of them. One from Charlotte, one from Mercer. South Carolina, as of today, they currently have 19 projected offensive linemen on their 2023 roster. Of those 19 players, USC returns 43% of the starts from their O-line in 2022. Jalen Nichols, of course, fifth-year senior, started all 14 games last year. Here's the issue, though. He's going to miss a majority of the season, at least to start. Nick Gargiulo comes in. Ja'Kai Moore, redshirt senior. He started 19 games during his career at South Carolina. That's the most by any Gamecock heading into the 2023 season. Okay? Jackson Hughes, redshirt senior, preferred walk-on from Charlotte. You keep going down the list. Vershawn Lee started in 16 games the past 2 years, including 7 this past season. Wanamaker's another one. Trey Jones. So I keep going down the list here just because once you get past Jones, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 11 players who are either redshirt sophomores, redshirt freshmen, or are freshmen. That's a young group. And that's not even talking about 2024, which if you look ahead and we start doing the math out.
Great Wall of Columbia.
With Williams decommitting, South Carolina currently has 3 offensive linemen committed to their 2024 class, which puts their projected offensive line total for 2024 as of today at 17. 17. So again, you look at what USC has as of today for this upcoming season, 19. You look at next season, they have 17, and they're only getting younger and better. And that's no disrespect to the guys that like the Nick Gargiulos. When I say getting better, they're bringing in young talent. They're bringing in young talent that they can develop. Josiah Thompson, Cam Pringle, Blake Franks. These are guys that, again, we talk about Pringle and Thompson, 2 of the best in the country. And Franks, I mean, shoot, he was getting recruited by some big schools. So I like where South Carolina is at with their offensive line. This year, I think it's going to be challenging to develop that rapport quickly. I know we're going to talk about the Georgia game shortly, but you have to play North Carolina week 1. Then you have Furman, and then you go right back to SEC play with that first game in between the hedges in Athens on prime time on CBS. It's tough. In that position in particular, they really need to come together if they want to have this offense clicking the way that I think people hope it to. It's not even about what Dal Loggins is going to be able to do, right? He's going to draw up everything that he can. Running back situation, I know some Gamecock fans aren't happy. They would have loved to have been able to pick up an experienced running back. I get it. None of that matters if the offensive line can't come together quickly. Talented group, but just very young, very young. That's why I still believe this team 2 years from now is really when they're going to come through. I think that's not to say they can't do big things this year, but if they can get through this year, these next 2 seasons, man, they have some young talent that they're going to be developing.
Yeah, Mike, there's definitely a foundation there for a long tenure at offensive line for some of these guys. Too many really, really good offensive linemen is a good problem to have, especially in the SEC. So I don't really see an end to it, especially the way Lonnie and Greg are recruiting right now. I mean, they're on a hot streak and they're not stopping. There's no real end in sight for the production of offensive line. So it's going to be a really, really exciting time for Gamecock quarterbacks too, along with the fans in terms of offensive line play.
Intern Joe, you mentioned quarterbacks, and that is a great transition because just last week, at the end of the week, some great news for a South Carolina commit. Dante Reno invited to the Elite 11 Finals. And if you're unfamiliar what the Elite 11 Finals are, because I know there's a lot of camps and all the other things that take place during the summer. If you're a quarterback, if you're a high school quarterback, a rising senior, getting an invite to this is like the Holy Grail. It is the Holy Grail. It brings together the top 20 rising senior high school quarterbacks for the class. And of course, for this one, it's the class of 2024. and it will be a highly competitive settings. They'll be taking part in on-field drills, routes on air, classroom instruction, and off-field development from June 14th through the 16th out in Los Angeles. The Elite 11 will be named at the conclusion of the Elite 11 finals. So I mentioned that because, I mean, you mentioned some of the names, just first round draft picks. Number 1 overall draft picks alone: Bryce Young, Carson Palmer, Trevor Lawrence, Kyler Murray, Jameis Winston, Matthew Stafford, Andrew Luck. And actually 12 of the past 13 quarterbacks that have won the Heisman Trophy attended either the Elite 11 finals or an Elite 11 regional. So having this opportunity to go out there, massive for Reno. And for people that are wondering why On3 has him rated a little bit lower in comparison to some of the other recruiting databases, because from a consensus standpoint, the On3 consensus, he's a 4-star. On3 is the only one that has him currently at a 3-star. He goes out there and performs well. All the people that like to say, oh, when a player commits somewhere, if he commits to South Carolina, they always drop him down. I think it's going to be the complete opposite, and I expect that to be the case. I expect Reno to go out there. If he doesn't even make the top 11, I still expect him to be the guy to earn a higher rating and earn that 4th star when that is all said and done, as he gets ready to put pen to paper in December with the Gamecocks.
Yeah, Mike, absolutely. Bringing up one of the questions here before we get to the ads, I figured we could bring up Big Reds.
Do it.
Will a 9-conference season jeopardize our rivalry with Clemson? Mike, go ahead.
I think the reality is it always can. It always can, right? I mean, the circumstances weren't the same, but during the COVID season, I mean, the SEC came in and said, hey, look, this is what we're doing. Again, it's comparing apples to oranges, but it also shows just the power of the conference, right? Conference said, hey, we're just playing within the conference. We're just playing conference games. And I know there's some, and real quick, because I know some people, I don't know where this misconception came from, because I remember a couple of years back, I remember going down the rabbit hole when I was still at Watch Fox trying to find out if there was actually legislation for it. There is no state law. I don't know where the hell this came from. There's no friggin' state law that says South Carolina and Clemson have to play each year. They've pushed for it. They've tried to make it happen, but there is no state law. If that were to happen, could that certainly protect it? Yeah, no question. But again, at the end of the day, and I love the rivalry, at the end of the day, you are part of the conference that you're in. And that is something where you're trying to be able to generate as much money as you can for not just yourselves, but for the other schools in the conference. So it's kind of, not the exact same, but it's kind of like being part of a union, right? And you're going against the union if you're just looking out for yourself. Oh, we want to make sure we do that. So again, I hope it doesn't go away, but that doesn't mean that having a 9th conference season, which again, I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, but it could jeopardize the rivalry with Clemson.
Yeah, there's always a chance. I think if Clemson stays as relevant as they are in these next couple of years, I think it gives the SEC incentive to keep that rivalry on the board. As long as both teams start tracking up, it's a good non-conference game to have. It draws television viewers, I think, especially because last year's game was so good. If the rivalry keeps getting better and better, it's going to be hard for the SEC to say no. So that's my take on it. But Mike, getting into the ad before we do that, you got one
real quick, because I know we were talking about quarterbacks. I want to just stay with it real quick and we'll hit those ads.
All right.
2024, who do you think will get the starting job, Reno or Sellers? My thought process on it is this. Don't rule out Luke Doty. Don't rule out Luke Doty. I think some people are assuming that Sellers will be the number 2 quarterback at some point this season. I'm not going to go as far as to say that. Again, we saw just a small sample size, or at least the majority of people saw a small sample size, which was just the spring game. I don't want to rush a freshman quarterback in there, especially when you have a guy like Spencer Rattler already there from a starting quarterback standpoint. You pray that he's healthy and does everything that he needs to continue to stay out there on the field. As far as next season, okay? So I'm under the assumption right now that Luke Doty will be the number 2 quarterback. No one will get hurt, okay? I'm going with that right now. At that point, Doty and Sellers competing, because now Sellers hasn't just been here for a couple months. That's the difference, right? That's the difference. He'll be here for a full year. He'll be able to work on what I think the biggest thing that he needs to work on, which again isn't necessarily something that it's just like, you're just trying to find ways to criticize the kid, is going through his progressions. That's perfectly normal, especially for a kid that was considered to still be a high schooler if it wasn't for the fact of enrolling early. And I thought from a talent standpoint, from a raw talent standpoint, he can do it all. He can throw the ball. He could run with his feet. His accuracy, even down the field, when you throw a 25, 30-plus yard pass, it was still there. And again, small sample size of what we saw from him. But he has the tangibles to be a very special quarterback. I think looking ahead to that season, the 2024 season, again, this is way too early, but just for the sake of the conversation, I would say my projected roster would be, as of today for 2024, Doty 1, Sellers 2, and I think Reno will slide up into that 3rd spot. And then from there, anything can happen. Reno will be in a situation that I feel like Sellers will be in this year, which is the pressure won't necessarily be on him to have to get in there. It'll be different, of course, because you won't have Reno. You won't have Rattler there unless South Carolina, of course, were to bring in a veteran quarterback, an experienced quarterback. But I feel like Reno comes in, if he's able to really blow coaches away, then yeah, there could be some great quarterback competition. I would give the edge to Sellers for the 2024 season. Why wouldn't you? Especially right now. That's a kid that has had a year under his belt at that point, Sellers heading into 2024, versus a guy like Reno who will be coming out of high school. Now, Reno will be enrolling early. He'll be enrolling into South Carolina in January, and that was part of the reason why he transferred high schools this past academic semester. I don't know if what they do up there. I don't know if it's just 2 halves. I don't know what they do in Connecticut. Some do semester, all that kind of stuff. But point being is I would give the edge to Sellers, at least at this point. But I'm not ruling out Doty just because I think he will have an opportunity to be the starter if he chooses to come back to South Carolina next year.
Yeah, I think the battle next year is between Doty and Sellers. You got to give Dante a year to kind of get into the system, get ready to go. Same deal with what Sellers is doing right now. I think Dante will come to South Carolina and do kind of, or have a little bit of the Sellers effect, show up and turn some heads. But I don't think he's necessarily going to compete for a job as a true freshman when you have a Luke Doty involved as much as he is. I think Doty gets a shot. It'll be Doty and Sellers.
Yeah.
Tanner Bailey will have a shot.
Out. Yeah. I think it's crazy that people are ruling out Doty. And again, you look at that spring game, I understand that everyone wanted to see Sellers. Shoot, like I just said, it was awesome. It was great seeing what he was able to do. Obviously, and even with a guy like Joe, when they're going up against the 3rd strings and 4th strings, it's difficult. And yes, Tanner Bailey is still there. I going into fall camp for 2024, Reno will probably be the bottom guy, kind of like how Sellers is right now. But I also feel like Reno and Sellers are going to be the 2 guys that are really going to climb quickly. Sellers is going to climb quickly this year when it comes to the quarterback depth. He's going to be the last quarterback on the depth chart heading into fall camp, and rightfully so, right when you're a freshman. But he's going to work his way up quickly. I think we all expect that. But again, those are the 2 guys that everyone is excited to see. But Doty is going to have his opportunity. Doty's going to have his chance, especially when you hear coaches just talk about his progression. It's not anything where I'd say, okay, Doty's going to go out there and he's going to, lead the conference in passing yards or passing touchdowns or wherever the case may be. The only time we've really had a chance to see him is either in garbage time or we've seen him when he was banged up. I mean, I can't look at anything freshman year and say, okay, that was Luke Doty. I mean, really? I mean, that team had already checked out at that point, his freshman year. So, again, that's not to say that Doty will be the starting quarterback automatically, because he's got some talented guys, especially some young guys behind him. And you really want to develop your young guys. But like a pitcher, you don't want to just throw a pitcher right out there. You don't want to just throw a pitcher right out. There'll be some guys that can do it, but you throw a guy out there and he loses that confidence early, it's tough to be able to reel it back in and put him back out there, and then they can be able to bounce back from it. Some guys can, not everyone can, though.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Mike, I want to talk about taxiety real quick, if you don't mind. Taxiety is an uncertain feeling you get right before doing taxes, but you don't have to go through it alone. The tax team at Liberty Tax in Irmo, Lexington, and Columbia will walk you through the process, clear up any confusion, guarantee you'll get the biggest possible refund or your money back. It's tax time. If you're in a hurry for your refund, call the tax team at Liberty Tax. Fast, accurate, and guaranteed. On the other hand, if you think you might be owing Uncle Sam, talk to the Liberty Tax team to make sure you're not paying more than you should owe. They'll find every possible deduction for you. Locally owned and operated, staffed by tax professionals from your neighborhood. Open 9 to 9 on weekdays, 9 to 5 on Saturdays with multiple service options. Start through the Liberty Tax mobile app or through their desktop portal. Make an appointment or just walk in. Give a call to upload your tax documents. And when you come in, your return will be ready to review and sign. Their number is 803-462-5576. Once again, their number is 803-462-5576. Give them a call for all of your tax needs.
And intern Joe, today's show is also brought to you by Perfect Franchise, my perfect franchise. Are you ready? Are you ready to leave the corporate rat race for the American dream? Looking for a side hustle working while you're still doing your current job? Wanting to diversify, build wealth, wanting to diversify, build wealth, and or leave a legacy? Well, Andy can help you. Andy is a franchise consultant as well as a franchise owner and helps people find franchises that fit their skill sets, financial requirements, time to commit, and much, much more. His services are 100% free, and he's here to help if you have any questions about business ownership. Again, that is Andy Ludicky at My Perfect Franchise, and not a bad person to maybe reach out to, intern Joe, because as many of you know, I know there's a popular pizza place in town that is franchising. So maybe you want to get into the franchise game, or maybe another business out here in South Carolina. You can give him a call and he'll be able to help you out. That'd be something that, I'll tell you what, whether it be Village City or one of these other places, being a franchisee, I know a lot goes into it, but it's pretty neat to have someone like Andy to help you out, because there's a lot of questions that come along with it. And today's show is also brought to you by our good friend, Clint Hammond of Movement Mortgage. Clint is a branch manager for Movement Mortgage. Contact Clint for all your mortgage needs. You can give him a call at 803-771-6933. Again, that is Clint Hammond. Clint has helped guys out like our very own Wes Mitchell, as well as former Gamecock quarterback Perry Orth. And I know right now it can be a little bit hectic if you're trying to buy a home. He can help you out with it. He can make that process a hell of a lot easier. So give Clint Hammond a call. So with that all being said, intern Joe, as we take a look at some of the other comments and questions. Let's see. I'm trying to see.
I was going to say, where do we want to wrap this up on? What's
we got Curtis. Let's see. Carolina rundown. With it looking more and more likely that DJ Braswell will get some serious minutes this fall. How do y'all think he will perform? Are y'all comfortable with him playing so soon? Any player comparison for him? Well, I think hearing Shane Beamer talk at one of the 1 million Welcome Home Tour events that he's had to do this summer, he's talked about the likelihood of Braswell seeing some serious time this season, just based on what they have in the running back room. And as we've said on this program many, many times, unproven depth. That's not to say that Dakereon Joyner can't be a special running back. That's not to say that Mario Anderson, making the jump from Division II Newberry up to USC, that he can't be a special player. And don't forget Juju McDowell. I know the his size, when you look at it, it's just like, all right, the workload, it might not be the same as a typical running back in the SEC, but at the same time, too, he hasn't been given that opportunity. I don't expect Juju to be a guy that, as I've said before in this show, I don't expect him to be a guy that's going to get 25 plus carries. I mean, there's always going to be outliers in the SEC. Maybe if DK was having a hot game, or Mario, but I really can't see this room having a guy that's going to be running the ball 25 plus times a game. Again, there's running backs that still do it in the SEC. There's still running backs across the country that run 25 plus times a game. There's going to be always outliers, but it's not like the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, even the early 2000s, where you have guys running the ball that many times. It's more of a by committee. And I know some people get tired of that. They want to just have one true running back. But I think the other thing too, in turn, Joe.
It's always been by committee, Mike.
The other thing too, though, is we're seeing more of it the last couple of years in college. And it's not even just running back. You're seeing, I'd say even defensive ends, outside linebackers. A lot of these guys are realizing, wait a minute, I can preserve my body in college, and it can help me with my draft stock for the NFL, and I can have a longer career at the next level. I know fans don't want to hear that, but it's just the reality of it. They're not going to be like, oh, coach, I don't want to go out. But there's a difference. There's specialists now. It wasn't always that way when it came to college football. So I bring that up just because I think you'll see him out there at some point. Player comparison, he's got speed. He's got speed. I think he can be a faster version of Kevin Harris.
Tank Bigsby is who I had in mind.
Yeah.
Faster Tank Bigsby. But that was really the only comp. I agree with everything you said, Mike. I mean, I think he's going to play, and I think it has always been by committee. Obviously, there's always the one outlier, correct? Like Bo Jacksons of the world. There's always going to be those. But I don't know. I mean, I don't expect super big things from him just because he's a freshman. And then, yeah, like a Tank Bigsby style, you need somebody like that, especially in the SEC. You need a workhorse. You always need a workhorse. I think DJ Braswell will be him.
And I'm just trying to do the math here real quick. I'm looking at stats from last year for the SEC.
As you do that, I'll bring up Big Red's question. Does having a quarterback wide receiver combo guy playing running back just show our ineptness at the position, or should we have more pure running backs to be taken seriously as a running threat, thereby opening up the pass?
Before I get to that, just to show people, Judkins over at Ole Miss, his freshman running back,
Yeah.
ran the ball 274 times. I mean, he was only averaging, I say only, but like it's the point, like you're not seeing the 25 plus, 21 carries a game in 13 games. So again, that's just to kind of show where that line is.
I like DJ Twitty too.
But yeah, I wish DJ Twitty had got an opportunity. I liked what Twitty did in the spring game.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with the spring game is this. You always have a guy or two who really just takes off, really just has a big game. And I'm not comparing him to, some of the performances we've seen, like a Jay Urich, right, in the spring game. But it's tough when you're not at practice every day to know the consistency of a player. Mm-hmm. So I say that because there's a lot of things that I really liked about Twitty in that spring game.
Twitty's got
a lot of things.
And for me, Twitty's got a lot of the intangibles. I mean, he's bigger. I like the third down or goal line type back because, again, he's the workhorse on the roster right now, and Braswell is the, I guess.
Well, we talked about it, intern Joe.
Yeah, we did.
If he wants to get on the field, right? You look at that running back room right now.
Yep.
And I think, and we can put, 1A, 1B, whatever way you want to call it. For the sake of the conversation, I'm going to put Joyner as the starting running back. You have Joyner as the number one. Juju number 2. I mean, I'm just talking about going into camp. Juju will probably be working with the ones though. But
Yeah.
Let's say Joyner 1, Juju 2, Mario Anderson 3. If a guy like Twitty or any of these other running backs, and they want to be able to get on the field, what's the number one way they can do that? Block. Be a consistent blocker at running back. We've heard it from Marcus Lattimore in the past. You want to find a way to stay on the field as a running back. Prove that you can block. Prove that you can block. Because when you do that, it opens up many, many doors. Many doors. Because if you're a running back that can't pass block, right? If you're a liability out there, when they put you out there, everyone and their friggin' mother's going to know what's going to happen. They know you're not going to be blocking. They know it's not going to be a pass. Why are they going to put your ass on the field if you can't friggin' pass block and you can only run? It's not going to happen. So if Twitty, if Mario Anderson, go down the list, all these guys, if they want to be able to see more playing time this year at running back, that's the number one way to do it. Is it the sexiest thing in the world? Certainly not. It's not going to show up in the stat sheet, but it's a big part of what South Carolina needs from that running back position in order to have offensive success this season. It's not just about being able to run the ball for 70, 80 plus yards or being able to pick up those short yard situations. I understand that. It's being able to give Rattler time so that he can get the ball to your playmakers like Juice Wells, like Trey Knox, like Eddie Lewis, like Marion Brown. Go down the list, like Nicholas Harbor.
Juju's a known pass blocking threat too. I mean, if you
he's got better with it. From everything we've been told this spring, he got better with it this spring.
If you listen to any of Eric Douglas's pressers last season, when he was asked about like skill guys pass blocking, Juju was always the first name he brought up. And so I think, and it's cool because again, a little guy like that throwing his nose into some of these bigger SEC talent level defensive ends, it's fun to watch sometimes. But I agree. Mike, I did have something for Big Red's question if we did want to get back to that.
Yeah, let's get back to Big Red.
All right, sweet. Yeah. So quickly before you go, having a quarterback, wide receiver combo guy playing running back, show numbers. No, I don't think it does. I think what it does is show kind of the opposite, right? It shows, depending on how it does work out, like if DK playing running back is just a complete and utter failure and they don't have any sort of sense of a game plan, then yeah, it does. But I think Dowell Loggins is smarter than that. He's going to have some kind of complete game plan for DK and to move him in and around the offense. I think having a guy like that isn't necessarily inept if you use him right, if you use the packages right and whatnot. And obviously you still do have some of the pure running backs, like we talked about, DJ Twitty. You've got a Dontavius Braswell, Mario Anderson too. So I think all those guys, they have the potential to kind of, explode when they want, or have the potential to be one of the, mainstays in the rotation at running back. So I don't necessarily think it shows the ineptness. More of, I think it shows if it's used right, if the DK package is used right and put together well, I think it shows, kind of the offensive prowess of a Dowell Loggins.
And one thing that I think gets overlooked sometimes when we talk about the situation that South Carolina has with the Kerryon Joyner in the running back room this year. While being able to land a guy like Diggs or whoever, insert experienced running back here for South Carolina via the transfer portal. If South Carolina was as concerned as I think some people on the outside are about the running back situation, they would have someone else in there, okay? Yes. They would have someone else. That's not to say they're looking at it and they're not saying, okay, hey, we can be a little bit better. Certainly they want to be there. They certainly want to be better. Any friggin' football team in the country, college, pro, high school, wherever, right? If they can find a way to get better in a room, they're going to do everything they can. And obviously high school is a little bit different depending on, unless you're a private school, you can recruit all that, but you get the point. Point being is South Carolina, is this an ideal situation that they're in at running back right now?
No.
Certainly not. However, Go back and listen to Montario Hardesty. Okay. What Montario mentioned in the spring is that he had even thought about the idea and wanted to carry on to be in the running back room last season, but he knew that wasn't going to happen. He knew that they weren't going to move him from wide receiver. This year, the circumstances are different, and he's in that room. And again, I'm not saying that Joyner is necessarily going to be, rushing for 1,000 yards this year. I mean, maybe he does. But I think the situation isn't as bleak as some people on the outside have made it out to be. It's not ideal, but again, if it was as bad as some people are making it out to be, South Carolina would do absolutely anything to bring someone in here. Anything. They would have pushed earlier. To get the running back that ended up going to Kentucky. They would have.
For LSU. I mean, they would have pushed harder to go get Logan Diggs.
And that's not to say they didn't want these guys.
On fire.
That's not to say they didn't want these guys. And I'm not telling you that the running back situation, everything is sunshine and rainbows. But again, I truly believe that when we talk about what South Carolina needs out of that running back room this year, you need someone that can pass block. We haven't seen it in a game at running back, but Joyner, as Montario has mentioned before, he's on the punt team. He's one of their best blockers. And how you go about that, it's very similar at running back. And I think with his skill set, knowing that it's not just being able to run the football, he can throw it too. Go ask North Carolina. I know we're getting ready for week 1. I mean, you imagine going into week 1 right now where there's so many unknowns about South Carolina. You have a new offensive coordinator. You don't know what the hell that running back room is going to look like in terms of the pecking order. You don't know what the offensive line is necessarily going to give you, and you don't know what he's going to give you until we have an idea of what this offense looks like altogether. But you're going up. You're going up, or the wide receiver room,
I was going to bring up the wide
receiver. We could talk about. But you're going up against North Carolina. You don't think they're going to be saying, shit, Joyner's in the backfield at running back. We have to be spending some time on him throwing the football. We have to be spending some time on him being able to be motioning out and being a wide receiver, right? Being a threat in the receiving game because he understands all the route concepts and can do a little bit more at wide receiver than most running backs. The amount of time that North Carolina is going to have to spend on defense, an area that they weren't that strong at last year. The amount of time they're going to have to spend when they prepare for USC it blows my mind at how much South Carolina is going to be playing head games with UNC. Because again, week 1, there's a lot of unknown. Just every team's going to have to be dealing with that. But the idea that Joyner, that same Joyner that embarrassed the hell out of you in the Duke's Mayo Bowl on that same field that they're going to be playing on, you don't think they're going to be spending extra time knowing that he's going to be in the backfield? You don't think there's a possibility that Spencer Rattler could motion out there? They're both in shotgun. It's going to be fun. Week 1, there's a lot of unknowns. But again, I think there's going to be some things that people are not going to expect from Joyner and this running back room as a whole that they're going to be able to surprise a lot of people. We'll see a lot of it week 1.
Yeah, I guess transitioning into our last question, going with it, I think another thing that is going to be fun is going to be to see who steps up behind Juice Wells. Obviously, Juice is your number 1 target, but what the wide receiver room will look like, it's going to be really interesting. You brought in a lot of transfers. Eddie Lewis, I believe.
Yep.
Eddie Lewis from Memphis. I am really high on that kid. I think that kid's got a really high ceiling, really, 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 really freaking fast. So if he gets loose in the open field, look out. So besides Juice Wells, and what you see is what you get. And I think this year's
I like a Marion Brown too.
Yeah,
Marion Brown, I think, with the speed. I mean, think about that. Juice, And I'm not saying that Juice and all these guys are the same level, but Juice, Brown, Lewis, Nicholas Harbor, those four guys talking about speed. And we're not even talking about Trey Knox yet. We're not even talking about Juju or DeCarrion in the backfield, or even Dontavius Braswell out of the backfield, which we don't know what we're going to. Mario Anderson, he's been flashing the hands a little bit. I mean, there's so many unknowns about this team. But one thing that we do know is they have a lot of speed. Can they put it? Leggett? Oh, thank you,
Yes.
Lynn. Xavier Leggett looks like a freaking linebacker right now. I mean, credit Luke Day and the strength and conditioning staff. I mean, the size of some of these guys. How many times did we hear in the past the number of Gamecock fans bitching, and rightfully so, bitching about the size of some of the guys? Oh, that's not SEC size right there. That's not SEC size. You saw it more so in the trenches. And maybe that's where South Carolina got pushed around a little bit. Again, they had players that went on to play in the NFL on both sides of the ball. But I use that position in particular, both sides of the ball, because those two positional groups, because that's where you noticed it the most. The size on these players is night and day compared to when Shane Beamer first arrived here. So Xavier Leggett, again, Luke Day, that strength and conditioning program and that staff, kudos to them, but a big shout out to Leggett. And there's many other guys that are also pushing themselves this offseason, and it's evident. But that photo, I'll try to pull it up real quick.
If I'm strong and then you strong and then we all strong then, Mike, I mean, it's Luke Day's ways are taking over really quickly.
And Gargiulo said he's up. And Joyner, we've mentioned it. Joyner, the night before the spring game, he was at a Garnet Trust, Gamecock Bourbon Society, and Cox by 90 event at Bourbon on Main Street. Joyner's back. His back has gotten so wide. And I say that because he looks like a running back. I mean, I remember covering him in high school when he was at Fort Dorchester, and he was running around I don't want to say scrawny quarterback. It wasn't scrawny, but string bean in comparison to what he is now. So, even in comparison to his first 2 years here, he's really put on a lot of muscle. And that's, again, you need that if you're going to be playing running back in the SEC.
Absolutely.
Any, before we wrap things up, South Carolina, Georgia, week 3. Between the Hedges, it's going to be on CBS. National televised game.
Week for CBS. It's going to be fun.
It is, again, look, we remember what happened last year, okay? Georgia kicked your teeth in. I mean, let's just put it bluntly. I mean, they kicked their teeth in. You're going to have an opportunity to go there, and based on what happens week 1, you're either going into Athens at 2-0, and I'm not trying to overlook Furman, but you should win that game week 2. You're either going into Athens at 1-1 or 2-0. Okay, most likely. So that could be, again, God forbid USC loses week 1. God forbid, because anything can happen when you're playing a Power 5 team week 1. They're always a toss-up. UNC, they're likely going to be a top 25 team heading into week 1. God forbid you lose that game. That's a game that now if you lose to Georgia, you fall to 1-2, right? And we've seen South Carolina over the last couple of years, these slow starts. If you can be able to somehow, even just compete with Georgia, that's what it's about. Just compete.
On a national stage on CBS, I think it's huge. Yeah. Whether they win or lose, I think a close game does a lot for your brand.
But at that point, though, again, talking about some of the unknowns, the running back situation, the offense as a whole, and it goes back to just a quick comment I want to pull up that William mentioned. Yeah, different type of offense. You have a new offensive coordinator. There's going to be some similarities from last year, but this is an offense that will be they'll be fast. It'll be a fast-paced offense. And that is catering to a strength of USC, which we just alluded to, which is they have so much speed. They are extremely well conditioned. I know every team in the country, they go through their strength and conditioning pro. I can tell you from talking to people inside that building, this is as good as it has been from a conditioning standpoint in a long, long time. I know that sounds like it's like, okay, what does that really even tell us? Why do I need to know that? I think back to one of my favorite movies, Coach Carter. And I think back to that first game they won, and they just absolutely outran that team off the court. And that was the difference. So, again, if South Carolina is, speeding up, going no huddle, whatever they want, if they can be able to start clicking on offense and they're going fast, they're going to tire some teams out there because they have the speed to really stretch the field.
Just got to stop the run. Stop the run.
We'll just show some of these comments here, and then we'll wrap things up. SC Scout Guy.
Scout Guy, bold, 2 bills. I don't know.
Mark, write that one down. That one down. Good to have you on here, as always, SC Scout Guy. William says, need to stop Georgia running the ball. That's their go-to, right? Them and their stud tight end.
Bowers, yeah. Who could be running the ball a little bit.
Yep, and again, the only thing that I get worried about when we talk about offenses that want to play fast, right? Go no huddle. You need to find a way to convert first downs, right? You go out there and you're going fast pace, 3 and out. Not only does that throw off all your rhythm, but you also hurt your defense because they're not having any time to catch their breath on the sideline.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be Tennessee fast, but a little bit more.
Yeah.
Chances coming into week 1.
Lynn says, I really like our chances week 1, coming from someone up near Raleigh, whose husband went to NC State. UNC's defense is suspect unless he found some players I am not aware of. Their defense is certainly their Achilles heel. They have a phenomenal quarterback. The offense is what really propels them. But again, week 1, you hope that Joyner factor will eat into some of their defensive time as they prepare for the Gamecocks. It happens with teams. Teams will spend a little bit more time defensively if they're preparing against a certain look, certain packages. And again, because of what took place in that very stadium, I'd expect Tennessee, not Tennessee. I see Tennessee right there. That's why I said Tennessee. I expect North Carolina to spend more time preparing for USC's offense because of DeCarrion Joyner, especially with him being in the backfield. And who knows? He could be in the backfield. He could be at receiver. He could be at quarterback. He could be selling hot dogs. I don't know. He could be doing everything. Joyner does a little bit of everything. Also does special teams as well. Well, intern Joe, it's been a fun one. Again, June, things are going to pick up with recruiting. If you're not already a subscriber to Gamecock Central, head on over to GamecockCentral.com. Sign up today, just $29.99 until the beginning of August. If you have never been a subscriber to a recruiting website, you're not just getting football recruiting, which, again, it's going to be big. Baseball, big time right now. Regional action is back in Columbia. You get all that. You get women's basketball recruiting updates. You get everything, absolutely everything. So head on over to GamecockCentral.com. If you missed any of our show today, you can head on over to Gamecock Central's YouTube page where you can find this show for free. Watch it from the beginning. Or if you're a podcast listener, head on over to the Gamecock Central podcast platform where you can listen to today's show in its entirety as well as any other shows. We have the interviews, the Garnet Trust interviews that air on 107.5 The Game, as well as the daily 107.5 The Game GC Takeover Hour with Wes, Chris, and Tyler. You can hear that as well over there. He's intern Joe. What you got, intern Joe?
We have foul balls tomorrow night, 7 o'clock. I believe me, Colin Taylor, Jack Veltri preview the baseball regional, and then we do have something in the works for that baseball regional coming out. Stay tuned to Twitter for that.
Perfect.
well.
Perfect, intern Joe. He's an intern Joe. I'm Mike Yu. We appreciate everyone watching tonight. Have yourself a great week, and we will do it again next Tuesday.